A wealthy business owner's infant wouldn't stop wailing in the coffee shop until a struggling server performed an extraordinary act. The morning was chilly and wet in central Boston. Wet pavement reflected dim lighting while tire sounds splashed through narrow streets. A corner coffeehouse, typically busy with workers and college students, remained nearly deserted. Coffee aromas floated in the atmosphere, mixing with damp wool scents from coats hanging by the entrance. Ella worked silently at the counter inside. Though 25, she appeared even younger, slender, perhaps too much so. Her light blonde locks were gathered in an untidy ponytail. Though worn with a small rip by the pocket, her apron was kept tidy. She cleaned the surface with deliberate, measured movements. Gentle jazz played from the café radio under the soft rain sounds. Then piercing, shrill, continuous crying began. An infant's wails cut through the quiet atmosphere. Ella stopped cleaning mid-motion, turning toward the noise with raised eyebrows. Across the room, a gentleman stood by a baby carriage. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark gray overcoat, his hair damp from rainfall. He moved uncomfortably while holding an approximately 10-month-old baby whose tiny fists were tight and face crimson with anger. The wailing grew stronger. Patrons glanced over then turned away. Two people looked at each other knowingly. One worker retreated to the back room. Nobody offered assistance. The gentleman gently rocked the infant while whispering softly. This only worsened the situation. Baby Leo's screams intensified as he struggled in his father's grip. Ella dried her hands and emerged from behind the service area. She paused briefly, then moved forward slowly and cautiously, avoiding startling either child or parent. "Hello," she said quietly. "May I attempt to help?" The man appeared surprised. Though attractive in a detached manner, exhaustion showed through dark circles and jaw tension. He was clearly overwhelmed and inexperienced. He started. "His crying isn't typically this severe. I'm unsure what's troubling him." "Don't worry," Ella responded gently. "Could I try?" He hesitated, then agreed. "He's called Leo." Ella reached out her arms. Leo's crying worsened as she approached, but she remained calm. She lifted him carefully with steady, composed movements, then complete silence. Leo hiccuped twice before settling down. He snuggled against her shoulder, releasing a gentle sigh while his small fingers grabbed her apron. The coffee shop seemed frozen in time. Even the rainfall quieted. Jackson Carter stood with empty arms, staring as though she'd worked magic. Ella seemed unaware of the effect. She rocked gently, one hand supporting Leo's back, the other patting rhythmically. All tension faded away. From elsewhere in the café, someone whispered, "The crying just ended." Jackson moved closer, speaking softly. "How did you accomplish that?" Ella glanced up, brushing away loose hair with her shoulder. "Sometimes they simply need to feel a steady heartbeat." He started to speak, then remained silent. He could only observe. His child, who had been impossible to console for 20 minutes, now slept in a stranger's arms, a waitress. She continued rocking while stepping around a nearby table. "Should I return him to you?" she asked in hushed tones. Jackson shook his head, still amazed. "Not just yet." He studied her carefully, the gentleness in her expression, her unhesitant movements. This wasn't an act. It was pure instinct and natural compassion. Ella smiled slightly, unaware or perhaps too accustomed to being invisible to think it significant. Leo moved, then curled closer against her neck. His small sigh made Jackson's chest constrict. This moment felt beyond explanation. Yet one truth was clear. In a reality where wealth and power solved most issues, this woman had just accomplished what he couldn't. Jackson Carter, the millionaire executive, could only stand watching, rendered speechless, not by business defeat, but by a stranger's gentle kindness in a worn apron. For the first time in months, he felt genuinely human. The rainfall had lessened when Jackson approached the counter to express gratitude. Ella had returned to the register, sleeves pushed up, her hands reddened from cleaning tables in the cold. She looked up as he stepped forward, no longer carrying the baby. "I appreciate what you did earlier," he said, his tone courteous yet distant. "I'm uncertain what might have occurred without your intervention." Ella shrugged slightly and smiled warmly. "He simply needed some comfort, nothing more." Jackson paused, then retrieved an elegant black business card from his coat's interior pocket. He placed it face up on the counter. "Contact my office if you ever require assistance," he said. With a nod, he departed, his tailored coat catching the breeze as the door shut behind him. Ella examined the card momentarily. Jack Carter. Carter Dynamics CEO. She blinked, a small furrow appearing between her brows, but said nothing. She tucked the card beneath the register's edge and resumed cleaning. Behind her, a colleague appeared with wide eyes and a grin. "Was that who I suspect it was?" Ella didn't respond. She was familiar with wealthy men entering establishments like this. She had long ago learned that expensive footwear often accompanied cold hearts. "He left his card?" her coworker inquired, already retrieving her phone for research. "That's not just anyone. That's Jackson Carter, tech billionaire, single father. Looks like a magazine model and operates half the applications on my device." Ella remained silent. She wiped the same counter spot 3 times before realizing she still held the cloth. That evening, just before closing, the door chimes rang again. Ella looked up, expecting a late customer seeking caffeine. Instead, he had returned. Alone, he approached without his usual commanding presence, though his arrival still filled the space like cold wind. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. Ella set down the cleaning rag. "You've returned." He nodded. "I failed to get your name earlier." "Ella." "Ella," he repeated softly, as if testing the sound. "I came to make a request, and I realize it may seem strange." She crossed her arms lightly, waiting. "My son Leo doesn't calm down for anyone, not even his caregiver. But with you," he settled almost immediately. Ella's eyebrow lifted cautiously. "I'm wondering if you'd consider caring for him. Not full-time, just occasionally, a few hours weekly. The compensation would be generous." Ella declined with a head shake. "I'm not a child care provider, and I don't typically become involved with." She hesitated, seeking appropriate words. "Individuals who inhabit a different reality." Jackson's jaw tensed. He nodded slowly, accepting the rejection. "I understand," he said. He pulled something else from his coat's interior. This time, a small envelope. "I don't require. Please open this privately," he said, his voice firm yet calm. "No obligations." He placed the envelope gently on the counter and left without awaiting a response. Ella stared at it for several minutes after his departure. She almost discarded it, but curiosity and something deeper prevailed. Later that night, in the small apartment she occupied alone, Ella sat on her bed's edge and opened the envelope. Inside was a folded note and a check for $2,000. She blinked. Her breath caught slightly as her fingers tightened around the edge. The note was handwritten. "If you need assistance or simply need someone to believe in you, contact me. Thank you for holding him as though he was precious. J.C." Ella closed her eyes, the paper trembling in her hands, not from the money, but from the words, "as though he was precious." Nobody had ever expressed that to her before. Perhaps nobody had ever said it to him either. It was nearly midnight when Ella finally extinguished the kitchen lights. The apartment above the laundromat was quiet except for faint city sounds drifting through the cracked window. She moved slowly, her body aching from another double shift. But sleep remained elusive. She walked to the corner shelf near her bed, a shelf she rarely disturbed. With careful hands, she retrieved a small wooden box and sat on the floor, legs folded beneath her. The lid creaked open, revealing faded hospital bracelets, a baby knit cap, and a single photograph. In the picture, Ella was younger, barely 21, with dark circles and a weary but tender smile. In her arms was a newborn boy wrapped in white blankets, his tiny face scrunched as if mid-dream. His name had been Noah. Her hands trembled slightly as she traced the photo's borders. Her throat tightened. She had never shared this with anyone. Not her employer, not her co-workers, not even her landlord, who sometimes wondered why she always paid rent promptly but never increased the heat. No one knew she had once held her entire universe in her arms, only to lose him 6 days later. Congenital heart defect, that's what physicians had called it. Something rare and unpredictable. She had spent months drowning in grief that remained invisible. Then one morning, She had risen, dressed, and gone to work like everyone else. But the grief never departed. It simply learned better concealment. Yet today, in that quiet cafe corner, when she had lifted baby Leo, for a moment it felt like muscle memory, like her heart had responded before her mind could react. The weight of a small body, the curve of a fragile head against her shoulder, the soft, trembling breath of a child who finally felt secure. She hadn't anticipated such a strong impact. Now sitting in darkness, the emotions crashed over her completely. She pressed the photo to her chest and allowed tears to flow freely, silent, relentless tears that had waited years for release. Her shoulders shook, her breathing hitched, but no sound emerged. When the wave passed, she wiped her face on her sleeve and reached for her phone. The business card still lay on the nightstand where she had tossed it earlier. She picked it up, reading the name again, Jackson Carter. Carter Dynamics. Below the logo, a number. Ella stared at it for a long time. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but something more delicate, hope. She opened the messaging application and typed slowly, deliberately, rereading 3 times before sending, "I'll assist with Leo, just part-time." She set the phone down, turned off the final light, and crawled into bed. She didn't know what this meant or if it was wise, but somewhere deep down, something had shifted, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel completely alone. The elevator chimed softly upon reaching the top floor. Ella stepped into the penthouse's quiet elegance, her worn flats clicking almost silently on polished hardwood. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed the Boston skyline, but she barely noticed anymore. She was there for Leo. 2 weeks had passed since that message. 2 weeks of part-time hours learning routines and interpreting baby sounds, realizing she still remembered how to hold, feed, and comfort a child. But it had become more than employment. Every afternoon upon arrival, Leo would brighten, arms reaching, eyes sparkling. He didn't react that way to anyone else, not the housekeeper, not the expensive caregivers Jackson had attempted. Just her, and that quiet, undeniable bond mattered more than expected. Today, she found Leo on the play mat near the couch, gnawing intensely on a plastic giraffe. Upon seeing her, he squealed, threw the toy aside, and crawled toward her with surprising speed. "There you are, sunshine," Ella murmured, dropping her bag to lift him up. Leo giggled as she kissed his cheek, tiny fingers gripping her sweater collar. Their days developed rhythm: bottles, naps, picture books, blocks, slow walks in the rooftop garden. Ella hummed lullabies she hadn't sung in years but which returned as if they'd never left her. Meanwhile, something gentle began growing. She taught Leo to say "ba" and "duh." One afternoon, he repeated them back with delighted pride. Jackson had entered mid-call, freezing in the doorway, phone forgotten. Ella looked up, unsure if she'd overstepped, but Jackson simply smiled. That quiet, reserved smile she was beginning to understand meant more than it revealed. Initially, he was all business, cordial, distant, professional. But recently, he lingered. He asked about Leo's day, his naps, his new favorite song. Once, when she mentioned Leo falling asleep to rain sounds, Jackson had quietly replied that was his mother's favorite sound too. It was the first time he'd mentioned her. Ella hadn't pressed. She understood grief that lived in silence. One evening, a storm arrived. Rain tapped against windows, thunder distant. Leo, fighting sleep, lay curled in Ella's arms, his head heavy on her shoulder. Jackson had texted he was running late. Ella hummed softly, blending with the storm and city rhythm. Eventually, she drifted off too, her body swaying gently as she sat on the couch, Leo sleeping soundly in her arms. When Jackson returned, the penthouse was still, lights low, the scent of lavender and baby powder hanging softly in the air. He entered the living room and stopped. Ella sat with Leo cradled against her, her head tilted back, blonde hair slipping loose around her shoulders. She still wore her café apron, now marked with milk stains and a faint imprint of Leo's hand. Her lips moved faintly, as if still humming. Jackson stood motionless. She looked like she belonged. He moved carefully, retrieving the knit blanket from the couch's back. Gently, he draped it over both of them, Leo's small body and Ella's resting form. His hand lingered momentarily, brushing a stray hair strand from her forehead. She didn't stir. His throat tightened. Jackson Carter had built his world on structure, solutions, control. But this wasn't a problem requiring fixing. This was something else, something tender that made his penthouse's sleek walls feel less like glass and more like home. He didn't reach for his phone or think about his inbox. He simply sat across from them, watching, listening to Leo's gentle breaths, to the quiet. That night, Jackson didn't work late. He stayed home. The soft sound of Leo's breathing filled the penthouse as Ella gently placed him in his crib, a lullaby still lingering on her lips. The apartment glowed with twilight's hush, peace earned through shared laughter and bedtime stories. She reached to turn off the lamp when her phone buzzed. A message from her former cafe coworker. "Girl, you're all over the internet everywhere." Ella frowned, tapped the link, and froze. A photo stared back, grainy, zoomed in, clearly taken from a distance. She was leaving Jackson's penthouse building with Leo on her hip. The headline screamed, "Tech mogul Jackson Carter's secret flame. Meet the mystery blonde holding his baby." Her heart pounded. She scrolled through more headlines. Is she the nanny or something more? Is Jackson Carter hiding a second family? Comments were worse. People speculated about her past, mocked her appearance, called her a gold digger. Some accused her of trapping Jackson. Ella set the phone down. Her hands trembled. Down the hall, Leo stirred. At that same moment, Jackson's office was in chaos. Phones rang. PR teams buzzed on speaker. His assistant looked pale. "She's trending, Jax." "Not you, her." He rubbed his temples. "I didn't even see the photographer. It's already gone global. The photo, the story, the speculation." Jackson's thoughts spun. Ella, Leo, their home's quiet safety, shattered. He left the office without another word. By the time he entered the penthouse, Ella was packing Leo's diaper bag. She looked up, calm, but her eyes were clouded. "You saw it," she said softly. "Yes." She nodded like she'd been expecting it. Jackson stayed near the door, coat still on. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this. Ella waited. He hesitated. "I didn't think it would escalate this far. I have investors pressuring me and the board." "I understand," she said quietly. He stepped forward, searching for words. "Maybe it's best if we take some space, just until things calm down." A long pause. Ella reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out the key he had given her, the one with the little silver L charm Leo loved to chew. She placed it gently on the entry table. "No need to wait," she said. "I understand." "Ella," she took a step back. "I told you I didn't want to be part of someone else's world," she whispered. "And I was right. I'm just a girl who held your baby. That's all the world sees. That's all you see too." He tried to respond, but nothing came. From the hallway, Leo's cry echoed, high and sharp. He had toddled out, sensing something wrong. Now he stood clutching the wall, eyes wide with fear. "Ma! Ma!" he whimpered, small hands reaching. Ella knelt and kissed his forehead, holding back tears. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. This isn't goodbye. Just not now." Leo cried louder as she stood and turned away. Jackson stood frozen as she walked out, the door closing softly behind her. He picked up Leo, holding him tight as the little boy wailed against his chest. For the first time, Jackson realized he had built a fortress. But now the only people who had ever made it feel like home were gone. The sound of Leo's cries echoed off the penthouse's marble walls. It was the third consecutive night. Jackson paced the floor, one arm cradling his son, the other trying to rub away the exhaustion settling deep behind his eyes. Leo squirmed against his chest, his face blotchy and red, tiny fists pounding softly in the air. "Sure, I know, buddy. I know," Jackson whispered, his voice frayed with desperation. "I'm here. I've got you." But Leo didn't stop. He hadn't stopped in days. Since Ella left, she didn't quit, not really. She had simply texted him one evening after her shift, "I need some time. Thank you for everything." No explanation. No return message after that. Jackson hadn't responded either. He didn't know what to say. The silence between them had stretched so long it eventually became the new normal. And now this. Leo refused to eat more than a few bites. He cried through naps. He tossed in his crib. None of the backup caregivers worked, He screamed louder when they touched him. The pediatrician had reassured him it was separation anxiety. But Jackson knew better. His son was grieving. The apartment, once filled with soft humming of lullabies and Ella's quiet voice, now felt too big, too still, too wrong. In the early morning hours, with Leo finally asleep in his arms, Jackson collapsed onto the couch. His shirt was damp from baby tears and his muscles ached. But it wasn't the physical exhaustion that undid him. It was the silence. He reached for the remote and turned on the TV, not for noise, but distraction, then paused. Instead, his thumb moved toward the Penthouse security app. He hesitated, then opened it. There in the cloud archive were the clips. Days and days of motion-activated footage from the living room camera. Most were uneventful, quiet afternoons, deliveries, cleaning staff. But then he found it. There she was, sitting cross-legged on the play mat, her hair pulled up in a messy bun, still wearing that faded green apron from the café. Leo was giggling uncontrollably as she peeked out from behind her hands in an exaggerated game of peekaboo. His laugh, so free, so full, cut straight through Jackson's chest. Another clip, Ella reading aloud, her voice soft and melodic as Leo clutched her fingers. Another, Leo asleep on her lap as she absent-mindedly stroked his back, staring out the window. And then a final one, Ella, alone, gathering her things after putting Leo in his crib. She stood by the door for a long time, just stood there looking around like she was trying to remember everything. His toys, the photos, the smell of home. Then she walked out. Jackson sat frozen, the screen glowing faintly in the dark. His throat tightened, his vision blurred. He didn't remember the last time he cried, maybe not since the funeral, maybe not even then. But now tears slid silently down his face. He had never thanked her properly, never asked why she came or why she left. He had been so careful, so controlled, afraid to feel too much, to hope for too much. And now the weight of everything he didn't say crushed him. Later that day, he stood outside the café where he'd first met her. The place looked the same chipped red awning, same faint smell of burnt espresso in the air. But when he stepped inside, the girl behind the counter was new. "Excuse me," he said, trying to sound casual. "Does Ella still work here?" The girl looked up from the pastry case. "Ella," she repeated. "Oh no. She left a few weeks ago." Jackson's heart sank. "Do you know where she went?" She shook her head. "No, she just stopped coming. I think she moved. I'm not sure." He nodded slowly and stepped back outside. The wind had picked up, biting against his coat. She was gone. For the first time in years, Jackson Carter, the man who built empires, who made calculated decisions and trusted nothing to chance, stood on a street corner, feeling completely, utterly lost. It was nearly dusk when Jackson stepped out of the rideshare and stared up at the rundown apartment building. The brick facade was faded, windows streaked with rain from earlier in the day. A familiar ache curled inside his chest. This was where Ella had once lived, where he had never thought to go until now. Clutching a small paper package in one hand, he walked up the creaky front steps and entered the dimly lit hallway. The air smelled faintly of old carpet and lemon-scented cleaner. He started at the top floor and knocked on every door, politely asking if anyone had seen Ella. Most didn't recognize the name. Some remembered a quiet blonde girl but said she'd moved out a few weeks ago. No one knew where. Jackson left the package with the building manager, asking him to deliver it to Ella's old mailbox just in case she ever returned. Inside was a photograph, Leo holding a crayon sign, his letters wobbly and uneven, the kind Ella had once taught him to write. It read, "Mommy Ella." Beneath the photo was a folded letter written in Jackson's usually sharp, businesslike handwriting, but softened now by something raw, unfiltered. "I failed to protect the one who healed my son. I won't fail again. If you never speak to me again, I'll understand. But if you still believe, even a little, in what we had, come to the park on Friday, 4 p.m. No pressure, no expectations, just truth. J." That Friday afternoon, Ella stood outside the park entrance. The air was crisp, golden light filtering through the thinning trees. She clutched the letter in her coat pocket, her heart thudding so loudly it felt like it might burst. She hadn't replied. She hadn't planned to go. But something pulled her there, not curiosity, hope. A quiet kind of hope that had survived despite everything. And then she saw him. Jackson was sitting on the stone bench across the lake, dressed in a dark sweater, his posture relaxed but his eyes distant, watching the water. Next to him, the stroller held a peacefully sleeping Leo. Ella stopped a few steps away. He sensed her before she spoke. Slowly, he turned his head, and for a few seconds they just looked at each other. The wind rustled through the trees, scattering amber leaves onto the path. Then Jackson broke the silence. "I was very good at building walls," he said, not looking at her. "I spent years perfecting the art. But you didn't try to knock them down. You just stood there, patient, kind." Ella stepped closer, then sat beside him, her voice low. "I built walls too," she said. "I thought the less I loved, the less I'd lose. But then Leo came along, and I couldn't not love him." Another quiet moment passed between them. Jackson finally turned to her fully now, his face open, his voice stripped of any defense. "I treated you like a risk, like someone who could disrupt my world. But the truth is, you're the only part that ever made it feel real." Ella's eyes shimmered. "So what do you want, Jackson?" He exhaled. Then, carefully, deliberately, "I don't want a babysitter. I don't want someone to replace anyone else. I want you here as yourself, as the woman Leo chose before I even knew I needed to. As the person I can't afford to lose again." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked over at Leo, who stirred gently in his sleep, his tiny hand clutched around the strap of his stuffed lion. When she turned back to Jackson, her voice was quiet but firm. "If I come back, there's no going back to the way things were." "I know," he said with a small, hopeful smile. "And this time I won't run." They sat like that, side by side, not needing grand speeches or dramatic gestures, just the truth, just presence. And sometimes that's all it takes to start again. One story ended that day, and a new one, something softer, braver, and more real, began. It was a soft late spring afternoon, and the little neighborhood bookstore buzzed with laughter, murmurs, and the rustle of balloons at the doorway. Inside, a banner stretched above the stage, "Book Launch, The Baby Who Stopped Crying" by Ella Harper. Rows of folding chairs were filled, parents balancing toddlers, children clutching books, teachers, neighbors, Ella's old co-workers, even a few familiar baristas standing near the back. Behind the curtain, Ella smoothed the hem of her simple white dress and exhaled slowly. Her golden hair fell past her shoulders, and a small lion-shaped charm rested at her collarbone, a quiet tribute to Leo. She peeked through the curtain and smiled. Jackson sat in the front row, Leo perched on his lap. The little boy, now a cheerful toddler, clapped as he saw her. Jackson looked up too, gaze steady and full of quiet pride. Ella stepped on stage. The applause was warm. She took the mic, cleared her throat, and spoke from the heart. "This story," she began, voice clear, "started on a very ordinary day in a very ordinary café. A baby was crying and nobody knew why, until someone held him, someone no one expected. The room stilled. I didn't know in that moment that my whole life was changing. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it shows up in silence, with a spoonful of oatmeal and a clean shirt." Soft laughter rippled through the room, followed by a breath of emotion. Ella's eyes found Jackson's again. He smiled. Leo beamed. After the event, as guests trickled out with signed books, Ella stepped outside into the golden light. Jackson stood under a maple tree nearby, Leo dozing in his stroller. In Jackson's hand was a small velvet box. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her like she was everything he had ever hoped for. "Then you gave me the words. Now let me give you the promise." He handed her the box. Ella's breath caught. Inside was a simple, elegant ring. Etched inside the lid were the words, "To the woman who made us a home." Jackson dropped to one knee. No stage, no cameras, just them. "Ella Harper," he said softly, "will you be not just Leo's home, but mine too?" Tears shimmered in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. 6 months later, the kitchen was filled with sunlight. Ella sat at the breakfast table, reading animatedly to Leo, who giggled at every funny voice. The counters were cluttered with paint swatches and the final mock-up of her dream project, Leo's Corner, a cozy cafe bookshop opening soon. From the hallway, Jackson appeared, sleeves rolled, smelling of coffee. He kissed her forehead. "You're glowing." She laughed. "That's just Leo's yogurt on my face." He grinned and handed her a towel. "Still the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Later that week, they hosted Leo's 3rd birthday in the backyard. Homemade lemon cake, yellow balloons, folding tables on grass. Laughter filled the air as children played and neighbors chatted. A little girl tugged Ella's dress and asked, "Are you his real mommy?" Leo ran over, wrapping his arms around Ella. "She's better," he declared. "She's my forever." Silence, then quiet smiles. Ella crouched and hugged him tight. Jackson stepped behind her, resting a steadying hand on her shoulder. They were a family, not by blood, but by love. The sky turned lavender and gold as they walked the lakeside trail. Leo ran ahead, laughing, chasing ducks with arms wide. Ella and Jackson walked behind, hand in hand, unhurried, peaceful. An elderly couple passed by, smiling. "Beautiful boy," the man said. "Beautiful couple. First child." Jackson smiled. "First of many, we hope." Ella laughed, leaning into him. And as the camera pulled back, lake shimmering, golden light casting long shadows, the image that remained was simple: a family not made by chance, but by love, freely chosen and never taken for granted. Thank you for watching this heartfelt journey. If Leo's tears, Ella's quiet love, or Jackson's proposal touched you, then you're exactly who we create for. We don't just tell tales. We stir something deeper: love, healing, and quiet hope. If this story moved you even a little, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because here we don't just share stories, we stir the soul. See you in the next one.